When we are creating blocks, we are creating blocks in a chain. We are creating what we might refer to as a blockchain. How about that? A chain of blocks that have been created. But blocks are getting confirmed as the network is proceeding along. And so what if a validator or an entire part of the network decides to approve a different block than what somebody else does? And so the rest of the network continues on like this, whereas somebody else maybe gets stuck down here, creating a completely different set of transactions and building off of what was in this previous block rather than the one that everybody actually agreed is what occurred. This is known as a fork, and forks can actually be done intentionally. This is known as a hard fork, where we take a chain and we intentionally say the rest of the network is going one direction, but we are going to go a different direction. A group of nodes can intentionally vote on their own fork, usually changing the rules in the process and creating an entirely different blockchain that uses the same root and base in the history of an original chain, but now we've created our own chain off of it while the original continues on without us. Examples of this would be these legacy protocols of Bitcoin Gold and Bitcoin Cash. These were intended to fix, in quotes, some of the issues of Bitcoin, and yet it didn't really catch on. The idea was, hey, let's take this great blockchain called Bitcoin, provide the fixes, and then the rest of us miners who are going to be part of this network will take it and use these fixes to create a better blockchain. Now again, neither of these particularly took off, but the idea was to create a hard fork of Bitcoin and allow the Bitcoin network to continue on without us. Now, we also saw this happen with Ethereum Classic. Ethereum was sort of its own hard fork off of itself, funny enough. So Ethereum itself said, hey, we're going to hard fork into this proof of stake world, and Ethereum Classic just continued on its own and said, okay, well, Ethereum's going to go off in its own direction, but we're going to maintain our proof of work methodology. And so Ethereum Classic sort of stuck in the past as its own blockchain, even though it is the original implementation of Ethereum. Now, forking can be intentional, as we see, but it can also be accidental, and that's usually not a good thing. Let's say we have a validator here running on the Solana network, and we decide to vote on a block that was produced. Well, remember, in order to finalize a block, we need to achieve a supermajority. 2/3 of the network needs to vote on it. Well, what if this block never actually gets voted on? Well, this is going to be a problem because we have just locked ourselves in to a block that is not going to be produced. And this is going to be, as far as this validator is concerned, an official part of the chain that it's building, which means that we have just created a fork accidentally of the Solana network. Meanwhile, the rest of the validators in the network, the 2/3 majority, says, all right, no block was maybe produced during this time slot, and instead we're going to proceed on this other block that was created after that. And so the rest of the network continues along, and meanwhile, this validator, maybe just one validator, maybe it's a set of validators, are going to keep going, if we allow it to do so, on the wrong chain. At this point, it's up to the validator to realize that the rest of the network has proceeded without it and to revert back and build on the proper set of blocks, and this can actually come with a lockout period that doesn't allow it to vote, sort of as a punishment for getting it wrong. So how exactly does this happen, though? I mean, how does a validator vote on the wrong block? Well, when we think about how Solana works and how fast it's producing blocks, we might produce a block here in the middle of this particular slot. Remember, these are slots which are responsible for creating a block within that 400 millisecond slot. Well, there's not necessarily a lot of time in order for the network to vote on this particular block before the next block is created. And importantly, the validator that is supposed to create this block maybe knows about this block here, maybe doesn't know about the block, and so it's going to try to wait as long as it can to try to make sure that it has the information and that that block has been properly and fully voted on. But the reality is that within the time frame of these 400 millisecond slots, it's unlikely that we've actually achieved the supermajority. So what should Solana do here? I mean, should Solana extend this out and wait maybe 2 to 3 seconds to produce a block, wait for that one block to be voted on before we even produce a second block? And the answer is no. We do not want to sit around waiting for that block to get voted on. We want to keep producing blocks, ideally hoping that we're going to very quickly achieve supermajority on one of these blocks and not have to go back in time and correct ourselves. But this means that our validators are going to have to play the odds a little bit when deciding whether to vote on a block. Because the idea here is to achieve consensus via the supermajority. This is what will finalize a block and make sure that it's a permanent part of the blockchain. And validators, as we mentioned, get punished if they vote on the wrong block. So what would you do in this situation? Well, if you're like all the other validators out there, we probably want to wait until so many votes have been cast. Maybe up to, let's say, 40% of the votes have been cast. Then we say, okay, maybe at that point we're going to hit our supermajority of that 2/3, 66%. And so we wait for a while in order to vote. But this is counterproductive. This actually works against the network. It slows the network down. And yet this is how validators are incentivized to behave. As a result, a lot of validators will run voting mods in order to delay their votes. The idea here is to wait until we know for sure, at least can have a good reasonable guess, that that vote or that block will actually reach consensus. And if we can delay our votes until then, we're more likely to have successful votes, which overall increases the rewards that we get, as we've discussed in other videos. And so fortunately, even though this goes against the network, Solana does have a fix coming for this, known as timely vote credits, and we'll be talking about that later. But that, at the time of this video, has not been implemented, and so there's still a lot of this happening in the network today. So that is how voting can create forks, which can be unfortunate for validators, and why validators ultimately delay their votes to try to prevent this. So like this video, subscribe to the channel, and always remember to stake at the lake.